Welcome out to Believe for America. This is Austin Hepworth. I'm an attorney, a law guy, here with Michael Hepworth, data miner, numbers guy, and we are here to talk about Case for America. We feel very strongly that America is a great nation, and that it still is, and that it has a lot of future and potential to it. And so we are here to talk about some of the things that make America successful, that have helped America to be the land that it is. And we advocate for maintaining the principles, the morality, and the different things that support that. And so one of the things that we believe very strongly is that liberty is a condition between anarchy and tyranny. There's a balance where laws are necessary to bring us out of anarchy, but private morality is necessary to keep us from tyranny. And in this balance, we have to, according to the song that we often quote, confirm our souls in self-control, our liberty and law. And that's from America the Beautiful. And so confirm our souls in self-control is this section over here. Liberty and law is this section over here, where both are necessary. So today we are going to follow up and discuss the Fourth Amendment a little bit more. The Fourth Amendment is an area where technology has really changed things. Technology, the size of business, and there's quite a bit going on that begs the question of, do we need to do more constitutionally to appropriately strike this balance that the founders, I believe, set out to strike? At the time, they didn't have technology. They didn't have crazy large businesses. Certainly nothing even closely approaching $1 trillion in value like Apple. And it gets to this place where we have publicly available information through technology, and it begs the question of, can government, can law enforcement use what's publicly available? Can they subpoena private companies for information? Can they utilize technology that exists to stop a bad person? Let's say, for example, that there's a school shooter in a school. They need to know where he's at. And in that scenario, they have technology now that can see through walls. You can have scanners that look into rooms, do different things. And so would the police be justified in using that, even without a warrant, to determine where the shooter was? And then if we say no, the question is, well, why not? What morality informs that? If we say yes, they should, the question is, well, what's the check and balance on that? How do we appropriately balance these things so that they don't just use them whenever they feel there's a threat? Because certainly in this scale of things, in that balance point, we do have to have a place where individuals, to truly have liberty, aren't being watched and aren't subject to being watched. And it's not even necessarily that we have to give freedom for people to do bad things. It's more that the individual mindset needs a place of privacy. You need a place to call home, a place to go back to where it's just you or your family members, and where you can process, you can think, you can be. But currently, we wanted to talk today about a little bit of technologies that are coming out, different things that are starting to happen that are really reshaping the privacy landscape. And the Fourth Amendment specifically talks about searches and seizures. So the government's not supposed to be searching our things, looking at our things. They're not supposed to be taking our things unless they have a warrant to do so. But even if they have a warrant to do so, is that always justified? So for example, recently there was a small newspaper in the Midwest. It was raided by police, and they seized their equipment, they seized their computers, they took their stuff. The 98, I think she was 98 years old, owner of the newspaper, died, I think a day after. She had a heart attack the day after the police raided her house. And they were literally, you can watch the videos of it, they're in her house. She comes out in her walker, "What are you guys doing here?" I said, "Oh, we got a warrant, we're taking your stuff." And it was a pretty aggressive police action on a newspaper, on a publisher, on the press, you could say. But it involved certainly seizure of things. And that was still using basic police force, You show up, you have your guns, you take what you want, and they move on. But with technology, it's really interesting to look at to say, well, what is the proper moral balance here? One technology to give an example of, it's not even a crazy technology, it's a pretty simple one, but you can get the Neighbor, I think it's Neighbor by Ring or the Neighbor app, something like that, that you have your doorbell camera. So a lot of people are putting doorbell cameras on their homes, and you can connect it into an app where the neighborhood kind of has access. It alerts you to things going on. So if someone creepy is walking by, everyone in the neighborhood can know. If there's a package thief coming through, everyone's doorbells can light up. People can be notified. And they have a lot of really cool stories about things that they've done and helped with in communities where they've come together and used this app. But if you go to the Neighbor webpage, they openly state on there, they're not shy about it. They say that they have a collaboration with public safety agencies, which means the government. They're collaborating with the government. They're sharing information with them in an effort, they say, to make communities safer. And that may very well be their intention. I'm not here questioning intentions. Just to say that, is that an appropriate balance where private companies can collect things? We can have cameras, we can set up stuff as private citizens. Should the company be able to opt us in to sharing that with law enforcement? And again, you could say, well, it could do some good. It could stop some crimes, right? And certainly if someone has their own doorbell camera up, could that person choose to share whatever footage they wanted with the police? I'd say probably. I don't see much of an issue with that. But as these things grow in number and grow in size, grow in connectivity, it starts to beg the question about, well, what is the government barred from doing? If they can just circumvent the constitutional protections, if they can search, they can watch, they can do things, what starts to happen to our freedoms? Does it impact them? Does the increase in safety create does it throw things off balance, you could say? If we're looking at the balance between safety, between freedom, between these other realms, what takes place when the police can say, oh, hey, Amazon, we want to see everyone's Ring doorbells. Or, hey, Neighbor app, we want to connect into things. Let us into the feed. We want to start watching where Austin, when he leaves his house, when he comes home, unbeknownst to me. Should the police be able to tap into that when they want? If it's a, quote, public feed because I shared it with my neighborhood? Should they be able to tap into a Ring doorbell if I didn't connect it to the Neighbor app? Should they be able to subpoena Amazon for that information? These are questions that, in my opinion, aren't fully addressed in the Constitution because the Constitution stopped at government. And I don't believe the founders fully anticipated a public-private partnership where the government worked with private companies in such a manner. And I would suggest or think that we need to start the discussion going about what needs to be done in this public-private partnership realm when private companies are working with public agencies or the government. Should there be some additional restrictions in place? Should the constitutional rights start to apply? What kinds of scenarios exist there, and how do we properly check and balance these different avenues? Michael, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know there's some additional technology you can definitely share about and talk about, but curious what your thoughts might be on the general question of public-private partnerships.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, like you said, it's not something that really existed until very recently due to technology. And our society's gotten to the point where we're outsourcing privacy, is maybe one way to look at it, where for either the sake of convenience or safety, we've partnered with a private company or organization that has a lot of resources, and we've said, hey, make our lives easier or make our lives safer. And to do that, they're gathering a lot of data, whether it's visual data through a Ring doorbell. Maybe it's data about the lock on our front door, when we lock it, when we unlock it. Is it unlocked right now? Is it locked right now? And so we've outsourced a lot of our privacy, things you would only be able to know 50 years ago by being in the home with somebody. You can now get sometimes through publicly available means, sometimes through subpoenaing businesses that maybe store that private data. So it's kind of an interesting situation for our society to be in. I don't know that most of us look down the road. I don't even know when you could say this officially started, but it really gained a lot of traction 20 years ago or so. And we said, hey, we're outsourcing our privacy. I think that came kind of secondary. We thought, hey, this is really convenient, or this is really safe, this is really fun. And then suddenly it was, wait a minute, what about my privacy? So it's kind of like you said, it's an interesting situation to be in, something that technology has provided a method for. Along those lines, you mentioned certain technologies. We talked about connected devices, whether they're cameras or devices in your house, and all that data is being stored somewhere. Generally, you can look up that data on your phone, right? You have a camera on your house, you can check it on your phone. That means that data is going through a server somewhere, it's being logged somewhere, and it's not by you, it's by a private company. So it's available to somebody else. There's a lot of interesting new technology out there. Something they've been able to do for a while is use cameras to recreate sounds by looking at vibrations. So Carnegie Mellon seems to, kind of lead out in a lot of this research, but they've been looking at things like chip bags in a room, and then they look through soundproof glass, and they put a camera on the chip bag. Then they have people talk, and they've been able to analyze the vibrations on the chip bag and determine what's being said in the room. They can use cameras, and sometimes they haven't even had to use the most high-speed cameras. They've been able to have some success using cameras that are pretty readily available to lots of different people. They just focus it on the chip bag, and they can analyze the data and come up with what was being said in the room just based on the vibration. So they don't need to actually listen in your home. They can use a camera to see what's actually being said. There's technology more recently, again out of Carnegie Mellon, where they are employing Wi-Fi routers to, I'm going to quote here, to detect and perceive the poses and positions of humans and map their bodies clearly in 3 dimensions. They're using AI neural networks and deep learning to recreate full body images of subjects or of furniture or of different things in their home. They're excited about the technology because it can help in places where a camera might be hindered by poor lighting, or maybe a camera is obstructed by an object. They can use Wi-Fi to determine what's behind an object, or if there's poor lighting, to still figure out what it is. Of course, this also brings up another host of privacy concerns. If this technology becomes mainstream, how easy is it to use a router in somebody's home to start to identify objects, maybe objects of value, where people are? Some may argue it's good for police to be able to do it, because if they're going to invade a home, they can see where everybody is, and then they can be safer when they go in. There's going to be arguments probably all different directions. That's typically the way it is with technology. It's, hey, we can see all these ways that maybe it can make us safer, but we probably should be having more honest conversations about privacy concerns and what we do to continue to protect the privacy of individuals. Probably one last thought on that is, we really need to strike the balance between safety and privacy. And I think it's a general thing of safety and freedom in general. Safety and liberty maybe is a better way to put it. Generally, if you think about a relationship you have with maybe a young child, you're a parent and you have a young child, in order to keep them safe, you're actually restricting their liberty quite excessively. Very young children tend to hurt themselves if you're, not careful. They fall down easily. They grab things they shouldn't grab. They don't know what's dangerous and what's not. You end up restricting their liberty quite a lot. as they get older and they get more responsible, you start to trust them more. But that also allows for more potential to injury. And I kind of look at that as a balance we need to be talking about in our country of we need to find a way to allow people to have liberty and to try to work to help people be safe as well. And I sometimes think we just focus on safety and maybe we don't talk about liberty as much as we should.
Yeah, those are some great points. And it's pretty wild to think about the Wi-Fi router stuff. If I've got Wi-Fi going and the police could tap in and say, oh, I can now see everything in the house. Or if the police can tap in, someone else can tap in and see everything in the house, where I am, what I'm doing, what's going on. And like you say, that gets pretty crazy. But I think one of the even crazier things about it is that, well, let's say they come out with some kind of protection. I put up, protection on my Wi-Fi router, but when I go log into Wi-Fi, I've got 10 Wi-Fi networks all beaming around me from neighbors and things. And that's one where in my neighbor's Wi-Fi I can now see in my house. And I can't imagine there's not going to be an app pretty soon that people can download to see what their Wi-Fi sees. And so now you have a situation where your neighbors can be spying on you. And this is something that, honestly, from my perspective, I don't know that, again, in the balance of confirm thy soul and self-control, thy liberty and law, I believe this is one where we may need laws to come out and actually help create a level playing field, and where illegal technology, where maybe some technology can't be used for certain purposes. You can't use Wi-Fi for certain purposes. Now, will people? For sure. People will break the law. But in general, if most devices sold have to conform to a certain thing, they don't allow it to be used for scanning, different things like that, then America is going to be in a better spot. Again, we talk about safety. I don't personally see how, in my mind, if you just have this wild, wild west of technology, how people won't be just driving their car by somewhere, turn their phone into a Wi-Fi hotspot and see whatever they want to see, whether they're by restrooms, whether they're by, whatever it is they want to look at. It could get very wild very quickly. And again, as humans, we need the ability to say no when I'm in a certain place. Someone's not watching me, whether that's the government, whether that's a neighbor, whether that's all these other things. And I don't believe that we're going to be able to just say, oh, we'll just make it illegal to spy on someone. I do believe the laws will actually have to have some protection about the type of technology, who can sell it, when it can be used, that type of thing. Because we have to be, in my opinion, we have to actually talk about checks and balances associated with these. And there are times when we have to put checks and balances on businesses. One I actually feel is an example of a check and balance that won't be taken care of just on its own through the normal capitalist structure, are things like environmental regulations, talking about appropriate environmental regulations. There can be ones that go too far. But if you look at what some companies are willing to do and just completely destroy rivers, just dump all their pollution in a place because it's cheaper than refining it or something, you see that one bad actor can have a very profound influence on a very significant amount of people and places. And I do believe that laws are necessary to help in that realm. Now, are there some laws with the environment that we have to be moral about and do ourselves? Absolutely. So I'm not advocating for all environmental laws whatsoever, but things like dumping of illegal and toxic chemicals, making that illegal is something that if some company just chooses to dump, and it eventually leaches into groundwater or drinking water or something like that, it can have profound impacts on people. And I say that because, again, in the technology realm, once the technology exists, it's replicatable. That's one of the things about technology, is people can replicate it. And good and evil can both replicate it. And so it's, if you think about it, let's say there's bad guys that have the Wi-Fi scanners, and we'd say the police aren't allowed to use them. Well, they can see every policeman coming in. They know exactly what they're doing, where they're coming from, and they can just, if they're in a building, hostages, whatever, they can just know exactly what's going on and pick them off as they come. And I don't necessarily think the Constitution requires that the police never use technology that's available, because they have to be able to fight the evil or the bad people that are using it as well. There has to be some ability to counter it, and we can't just expect the police to say, oh no, all that you can do is sit there and just risk your own life. We have things. I saw that a police force started using these, but they've developed these robotic dogs, and they're both incredibly cool and incredibly freaky. And they're four-legged robots that are kind of built the shape of a dog, but they don't necessarily have a head coming up off of it, head or neck. They have a version that has a machine gun coming up off of it as the head, and so it can run around in crowds and just fire a machine gun. But they have versions, these dogs can do a lot of things. They can run, they can chase, they can jump on people, they can fire a gun, they can do different things. And it makes a ton of sense to say, well, we're not going to mandate that every police officer risk their life every time there's some crazy person with a gun. And again, I look at it and say, I don't believe society's ever going to say that the police can never use those. But I feel that's what happens is people say either ban the police from using it or, yeah, let's use it. And I go, but isn't there a middle ground where we talk about appropriate checks and balances? We talk about when you might be able to use something like that. What's going on there? Do we want robotic dogs sniffing our luggage at the airport? Maybe, maybe not. But do we want a robotic dog if there's a bomb threat? I think so. I think most people would be pretty comfortable with robots going in to defuse a bomb, not making a human go in there. And so again, I say there's a balance. There's an extreme balance, and the technology side is fascinating because if you're a Wi-Fi router, if they can read how the Wi-Fi is bouncing around and create a visualization of you from Wi-Fi, there's got to be a lot of ways they can do that, probably even more accurate ways than Wi-Fi. And I can imagine a machine that comes along and it just sends out some signals and gets a complete X-ray of your house back. And I know they have machines that can see into your house, that can see through walls. And so, again, it becomes this thing of, well, what do we do about the technology? Now, does Sarah just say, nope, can't use it, we're going to bury our head in the sand? Or is it to say we need to rise to the challenge as Americans and appropriately talk about, well, government, we need some restrictions in place. We need some checks and balances. We'll let you use the technology at certain times so you don't have to completely risk your life. But we're going to have some pretty strict restrictions in place. Another technology I think about was back in 2007, 2008-ish, when I was in Ann Arbor for law school. I had a neighbor in our apartment complex, and he was working at some kind of invention lab of some sort. But they had been tasked with creating a robotic bat that could fly and look just like a bat, but could go around and listen to anything, be a camera on anything, and just fly around at night and no one have any idea about what it was. And he said back then they were doing pretty well, but it struggled in the wind. They were still struggling to figure out the wind side. But he also mentioned that there was work on robotic bees, different things, bumblebees, you could fly around. No one has any idea that there's anything they're spying on him. And so you start to think about things like that of, we mentioned last week, well, New York was flying drones over people's property to see if their crowds were too big. are we okay with that? Or should our property have certain privacy rights to it? We have satellites spying on us. Google can see the trampoline in my backyard. And so should my insurance company be able to log in and to Google Maps, or just get on Google Maps and say, oh, Austin, tramp in your backyard, we're going to charge you more. What does that start to look like as we, as a people, try to navigate this realm of, can my insurance company just fly a drone over anytime they want? They're putting that in contracts now. They'll just fly a drone over, check out your house. We've had, in our old neighborhood, we had a neighbor that just gets a letter from the insurance company, says, hey, we flew a drone over and you need a new roof. We're going to drop you from insurance unless you get a new roof. And you go, it's not the government. Private company, it's in a contract. But when every single insurance provider says you have to let us fly drones, well, you look at what's happening right now with auto insurance. Nearly every single auto insurance company is saying, well, we'll give you a big discount if you let us track you while you drive. Let us monitor you, see how good of a driver you are. And they'll track your cell phone usage. They'll track all kinds of things, which again, could make us safer. Maybe there's fewer accidents if we're not using our cell phones. But what happens when the insurance company has access to knowing everywhere I am in my car at all times and exactly how fast I drove? And the government says, oh, give us that info. We don't have, I don't believe we don't have any real protections in place for these scenarios. Is it going to the place that our cars are going to watch everything? Yeah. The federal government mandated that cars have the ability to detect drunk or drowsy drivers. And I think that's by 2026, if I remember right. And so the solution that most companies will be using is the solution of putting cameras in that watch your eyes and determine when you're drunk or drowsy. You start to think, wow, so, okay, we're supposed to have things like retina scans that are supposed to be pretty unique to you, but what if everything can scan your retina as you walk by? What starts to happen if that's just out there and someone gets hacked and now your retina is available everywhere and they can get into any private thing you want? I don't know. Again, to me, there's real concerns to talk about.
And even on the simpler side, I just remembered I saw a video. A man was reviewing a new video game. It was probably on the more violent side of video games. It was rated M and 17 above or something. And he said that with the new technology, they're going to ensure that only adults and 17 and above can play these games. And the way they're going to do that is they're going to start scanning your face. You have to take a picture of your face using the device. And then if you want to play the game, it's going to scan you and say, yep, you can do it. I can see that you're the one playing the game. Now you can play the game. So your face is going to get stored in a database to make sure that only adults are playing these violent video games. And it's just an interesting development because at some point, people with the insurance companies tracking how you're driving in your car, some people say, well, you don't have to do that, right? You don't have to get the discount if you don't want to. At some point, if enough people adopt it, then the insurance company becomes comfortable just saying you have to. If you want to be insured through us, you have to plug this into your vehicle because they're not going to really lose money because people don't have anywhere to go. Every insurance company is going to say the same thing. So there's two sides to this. There's, hey, we need to go and have a discussion at the governmental level about what our protections are for privacy. And then there's, hey, what does it look like as a citizen interacting with these private companies? What decisions should we be making to try to encourage good behavior by private companies when it comes to privacy? Can we make financial decisions that can encourage this? Can we attack this from two sides at the same time so that, yes, you may have to, I don't know that having a good amount of liberty is always the cheapest option. Sometimes maybe we do end up having to pay more to maintain our liberty, but what kind of decisions can we make at both levels, both of the governmental and in our lives, so that we're saying, no, we need to maintain some privacy here, and we're going to make decisions to enable us to do that.
Yep. And those are really good thoughts. Because certainly, to your point about liberty not being the cheapest, liberty is not the cheapest option when it comes to technology. It will cost us additional money to use the different technology that we use currently. And the cost right now, the payment that we make, you could say that, the quote payment is we pay for the free services with our privacy. And again, it begs the question, and this is something a lot of people say, well, if people choose to give up their privacy for save a few bucks, then it's not worth that much to them, and do we need to protect them from it? And it's a very valid question. But from the perspective of, to your point of, but it reaches a point where as a society, you don't have an option anymore. What are you going to do for insurance? You have to have insurance to drive. That's a law. So I don't have a choice whether I buy insurance or not. So if all the insurance companies just come out and say, all right, we just mandate that we track everything you do, then what's happening is they've coupled the law of a mandate that you have to have car insurance, and now they get to pick the rules for what you have to do to have car insurance. And can they then say, oh, well, we're not going to insure you unless you sign our diversity pledge or agree to teach certain things to your kids, or, we don't want to insure anyone that believes in God. It's a private company. Should they have the freedom to do that? Currently, we'd say no, because that would violate the Civil Rights Act, which says you can't discriminate on the basis of religion. But let's say the Civil Rights Act's repealed, at least that portion of it as to religion, which is something that happens a lot with the push with the LGBTQ movement, is they say, this religious stuff gets too much in the way. Let's repeal the provisions that protect religion. And those provisions are statutory right now. They're up for debate. And so if they repeal that, could a company then say, yeah, you got to swear that you don't believe in God if you're going to get insurance here? Oh, I'm sorry, you don't have to have insurance because you don't have to drive. So it's a choice at this point. And to me, what's happening is we're not being honest about the fact that there is some level of consent involved for sure, but there's some level of coercion. And there's this very sinister, very subtle mixing of an element of coercion with an element of choice, and it's being called pure choice. And it's not pure choice. And it's happening quite a bit of this public-private partnership where and I think we'll talk about this more in a different podcast later, but I look at the ills of combining capitalism and socialism together. So socialism says we want to protect people at all costs. We want to stop from anything bad happening. We don't want people to be harmed. We want to house the homeless. We want to do all these different things. And again, I believe there's a real human element to saying we want to remove harm. The problem becomes the mechanisms to do it, the means to do it. Do we actually set up a structure that creates more problems than it helps? But if you look at America that says, oh, hospitals, there's a new technology out, you can save more people's lives, and you weren't using it. Currently, the law is saying, so you're negligent, and we're going to hold you liable for being negligent. Now, it's not the second a new technology is out. They're not required to adopt it the second a new technology is out. But once a technology can get enough hospitals to adopt it, then those that haven't adopted it are now negligent because, well, over 50% or 60% or 70% of America is doing it better. And the results are now subpar without this new technology. But I say that because what happens, and there doesn't even have to be any conversation between people. There doesn't even have to be any coordination whatsoever. It just means to a private company that if I put $1 billion into research and development, maybe a hospital would have never bought it on their own, But if I can now make them worried that there's a new technology, there's a better way to do things, and they're going to get sued unless they buy it, then they have to buy it because they're going to get sued for negligence. Because to your point, Michael, at some point there's this tipping scale where it's voluntary, quote voluntary. I can opt out for a time. But there's always a tipping point at which things become the norm. They become established. And at that point, what in the world do you do? And this is known, and the liberal movement, I'd say evil people that are seeking power, and I'm not combining those two together, just saying the liberal movement, comma, evil people that are seeking for power, people that are working to really change and shape America as a third group know this, and they push things to create new norms, because once you have a norm, eventually enough people adopt it that it becomes the governing law, it becomes the governing force. And when these things are coupled very very subtly with the law, when there's this element of coercion mixed in, they become incredibly powerful and they shape America in many ways. And so to me, as I see the Fourth Amendment struggle taking place and people saying, oh, it's a private company, it's opt-in. Well, again, yeah, it's opt-in with email, but is it really opt-in with email? Because I have to have an email to function. I have to have an email to go to school. And it's not just that I can have any email I want. My kids, if they're in public school here in the area, have to have a Chromebook, have to have a Gmail account. It's provided through the school. They don't get to just say, oh, I'd like some other email service, no Proton Mail or anything. Nope, they have to use Google because it works with all the school integration. It works with all these pieces. And then they still have those terms of use there to say, I accept, I agree, Google, do whatever you want to do with my data. But there's not the choice. And again, people can say, well, then the kids in the area should homeschool. Okay, so they homeschool. But even then, is there enough apps? Is there enough accessibility for a homeschool parent to be able to teach their children everything they need without ever using a Google service? Maybe we're still able in our society currently to do that. But we're using generally a Google device, a Microsoft powered device, a Google powered, Microsoft powered, or Apple powered device. Our three main options. And anyone that wants to educate their children in this sphere have to pick one of them. I know people that are very anti-Apple, people that are very anti-Google, and people that are very anti-Microsoft. But generally, for whatever reason, they're comfortable with one of the other companies. But it's not a lot of options. So when they say, well, opt in, these are our terms of use. You agree we can share this with the government. You agree we can take and sell your data however we want. What do we do at that point? And is it true consent once there is this element of coercion tied in with it?
Which I think is a really great way to frame it, because I think at the very outset, there remains a lot of choice. We can probably still talk about that as far as scanning devices in cars for insurance companies. No one's requiring it yet. They're becoming more popular. And so I'm not making an argument one way or the other. But if you decided that maybe this wasn't the proper thing to do, and enough people were on board, if people just were opting out of it, car insurance companies would just stop offering it. But at some point, as you were saying, we've kind of moved beyond the scale where it's been so widely adopted. You're essentially coerced into using it if you're going to participate in some manner in society. Can't send a child to school anymore without, as you mentioned, some sort of piece of technology that they're using. And so at some point we need to really seek the kind of governmental solution. How do we continue to protect ourselves where these kinds of technologies are really widely accepted and don't feel like I really have much of a choice around it? And then for something very new, can we take a critical look at it and say, should that be something we pursue as a society, or should that be something that maybe we pump the brakes on? I think is probably the two areas we're looking at. We've gone so far, there may not be anything left to do except to try to create good privacy laws to help protect us from some of these situations we're in.
Yeah. And it is, and again, part of it is to say, maybe we shouldn't be afraid of progress. Maybe we shouldn't be afraid that things can happen if we put in the proper checks and balances on all the new things that come out. I just feel that the error in what's happening currently isn't so much that we let a new technology evolve and didn't ban it or something. It's more to say, how do we have an honest conversation about the balance, appropriate restrictions with appropriate things, because that's what's always necessary to create a state of freedom. If you think about AI and information technology, I think Coke just released their AI powered Coke flavor. They had AI help generate a new Coke flavor of what the future will taste like. So I don't know if it tastes extra metallic for the AI or what the situation is, but it's one where AI is here. We can just say as a society, let's ban it. And I don't believe that's entirely the way to do it. To me, it's to say, from a check and balance perspective, maybe even how do we reach a place where it is a true consent thing, where there's true consent to it, where maybe, and again, I'm just shooting off the cuff here, so this isn't something to take as gospel or anything. This is just a brainstorming session but maybe there's some need to have something that says, hey, there's certain things you can't force people to do or require that people do in order to use your service. You can offer it to people, and if people want to opt into that route and go that route, that's their freedom to do it. But for those that don't want that, you need to provide an alternative that's just as workable. I think we do this with voting. We let people come in and vote without photo IDs and all these things just because America said, well, there's 10 people or 1,000 people or whatever the numbers are that don't have a driver's license. They're not gonna be able to vote if they can't do this. And these voices win claims and things. And we have this situation still where we deal with checking voter registration and making sure people are the right people voting, because it's not widely adopted that it's all based on photo ID, because there are still some people that would leave out. And as a society, one of the things we strive to do in America is to have some level of protection for the minority, to say, okay, we get it. And again, that's always been at the government level. And we're talking private companies here. And to me, we need to really start discussing this morality of understanding that from the beginning in any capitalist system, they've talked about the harm of monopolies because they can control things. There's an immense amount of power that goes if there's not a true alternative. But if 3 companies are up there and they control virtually everything, Microsoft, Google, and Apple control almost all devices just by providing the software that's on them. We're in almost a monopoly type state. We're not very far from it. And those companies can say, well, we know everyone's so dependent that we'll just mandate whatever. And we might lose a few people that choose to somehow live without a device. But for the most part, everyone's going to have to come along with this. And I look at it and say, no, constitutionally, we probably need some checks and balances. We made a constitutional protection against big government. And we may need to talk about what happens, maybe not so much the size of a company as much as the state of the industry. If it is just 3 players, and we have an oligarchy essentially of a few businesses that control everything, what's needed and what do we do at that point? And what do we preserve as rights to people? And so these are conversations we'd love to have. And we're not professing to have all the answers today. What we're trying to talk about is principles of balance and where we see maybe some of that balance going off. And I personally feel that this is one area that could circumvent an incredible amount of the Constitution if we allow these public-private partnerships to continue without some type of checks and balance in place. And I feel very strongly that we need to become very proactive as a society about discussing these elements, starting to raise them, starting to propose solutions, letting people see and kind of bat down ideas to say, oh, well, if you did that, it would destroy this. And so then it's this thing of back and forth, how do we get to a workable solution? And I do believe there are some good solutions that can come out of it. I very much do. But I believe we need to have the discussion and we need to find ways to balance these interests in an area where I don't believe the founders had any way of foreseeing what would happen with technology and companies and how it would provide this means to circumvent the Constitution. And so that's something that we should address. Michael, I don't know if you have any final thoughts for today in the Fourth Amendment realm.
I think you're hitting it right on the head. I think there's massive risks to our liberty if we don't address this. But again, what the answers are, I think we need to get people together and talk about this candidly. Talk about the risks, what they are, what we see in the future. We don't know what technology holds. It's changing so fast. We need to try to figure out what the principles are behind our privacy and how we need to be able to maintain it. Because there's going to continue to be new technology coming out that's going to challenge everything we know and our ability to maintain our privacy. And I don't know that government wasn't made to change as fast as technology changes. It's just never going to be able to keep up. And so we really need to base these kinds of things on principles so that they can handle changes. And then we need to be aware so that as technology continues to shift, we can stay on top of it with what we're asking of our government and also be aware for ourselves. Again, I'm not asking people to forfeit technology, but your dollar plays a big part in the products that are offered. If a new technology comes out and nobody buys it, and the feedback is because of a privacy issue, then the company will immediately change it. And so we need to be vigilant in two spheres. We need to get together and work on how we can protect ourselves with the law. And then we need to take an honest look at maybe how we spend our money and say, are there better options? Can we help give some feedback on what we expect our products to do for us instead of just accepting kind of whatever is given to us?
Yeah. And that's, I think, an awesome note to end on, to really strike both sides of that balance. What laws are necessary and appropriate, what morality is required of us. And then we really walk that walk and talk that talk and really do some work. And this is an area that I believe every American can contribute to, start putting out the discussion, start talking about it, because it prompts ideas, it spurs collaboration, and those ideas spread. They get planted in the minds of people. People can adopt those, other people can talk about them. And it's a neat process to watch. And again, the founders did it. We can do it too. We have the means to talk and discuss and solve problems. And so this is one where, to me, is high concern. Because if we don't do anything, crazy amount of the Constitution can be circumvented through the public-private partnership, where coercion is passed and then the business has to act, but then we say, oh, the individual has autonomy. And just as an example to close on, when the Biden administration came out and said, oh, any business of 100 more employees, you have to make every one of your employees get the vaccination. It was a whole element of coercion, but it was touted as still being, well, the employee can still consent because they can quit. It's just not entirely true for everybody. yes, there are some people that can quit and get a new job. But on a grand scale, grand scheme of things from a societal perspective, that's not true. And that element of coercion was very much, wasn't even subtly tied in, it was very directly tied in. And it was this very aggressive push to say, we're going to mingle coercion with consent and then just waive all constitutional rights by saying, it's consent, you're still working here, too bad for you. And so that is the tactic, and that's what's happening, and that's what we need to guard against in these realms. So thanks for being with us today. We really appreciate you. And we will continue these discussions. We'd love to have you join us. We are, we'll very shortly have a website launched where we actually will be collaborating on these issues. And we would love to have you join us there as part of our Believe First efforts to say we believe in America. We work to collaborate and promote America. And so keep tuning in, and we will follow up with you next week. Thanks so much.